Well, do you know what happens 273 days from today? You don't know? This is what happens 273 days today, the Little Rock Marathon. Y'all aren't signed up yet? Nobody? It's the weekend of February the 29th through March the 1st, 2020. I know what you're thinking. I can't imagine running 26 miles, right? I get tired driving 26 miles, much less run it, right? So imagine you had somebody in your life who said, you know what? 273 days from today, I'm going to run the Little Rock Marathon. That's it. That's a set of goal. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run the marathon 273 days from today. I said, okay. They sat down and, man, all of a sudden they started running. They had a race pattern set out. They had training exercises. They ran in a very regimented manner. They ran in improving their time, improving their distance, and they were running to be better so that when the marathon came, man, they were ready to run the race. And then not just running, but they went up and them and Jeff Vaughn up at the exercise place became really good friends, and Jeff designed a workout regimen for them, and he gave them, like, this is what you do on Monday, and this is what you do on Tuesday, and this is what you do on Wednesday. And they just really just this incredible, detailed running regimen in preparation for the Little Rock Marathon. And they knew when to run. They knew when they were going to lift weights. They knew what they were going to do on their days off. They knew what they were going to do on their days of rest. They had everything ready. But every time they went to eat something, they went to lunch at the Western Sizzling. And they went in their stretchy pants. And man, they just went back like 9 times every time they went, right? And then at dinner time, they went to Golden Corral, and they had moved up to like Santa Claus pants. I mean, they were going to go in there, and they just went and ate and ate and ate, and you'd be like, what are you doing? And then they came to you sometime about October, and they're like, man, I don't know, I can't improve my time. I can't run farther than I was running when I started. You'd look at them and be like, wait a minute. I understand you have a very detailed running regimen, and man, you exercise every day. But every time it comes time to eat, you go to bed with the boxes of Twinkies, man. Like, something's not adding up here. Like, you can't run and have this incredibly detailed, ready regimen and then eat and behave in any way, shape, or form that you want. You would look at your friend and you would say this, man, you're crazy. You can't truly believe that you're going to be ready 273 days from now to run the Little Rock Marathon. You're not going to be physically ready. You would say that, but then also you would say this in your mind. I don't know how much really you are committed to running the marathon. But you would look at him and be like, man, I understand you want to work out and I understand you want to run, but I'm not for sure that you're actually really committed to running the marathon. We come to a text today in the book of Isaiah where God is speaking to the nation of Israel. And while on one hand they're doing all these incredibly great things, they're doing all these remarkably detailed things in their relationship with the Lord, there's areas of their life that's just gone completely awry. And so what I want us to do is I want us to walk through these 12 verses together, just to kind of lean into the text a little bit and hear from God as he speaks to the nation of Israel. The first thing you see in our text today is hindrances to God moving during a fast. Hindrances to God moving during a fast. Pick up with me in Isaiah chapter 58, verse 1. Cry out loudly. Don't hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Tell my people their transgressions and the house of Jacob their sins. Now, verse 1 is the functional equivalent of middle name usage. You know what I mean? When I was a kid growing up, if my mom and dad called me David, I knew things were okay. If I was in the other room and I got called David Odell, then I knew that, okay. But if I heard from the other room, David Michael Odell, I knew that I needed to find a window to get out of the house real quick. Verse 1 is middle name. God's calling the nation of Israel together, and he's like, listen, we got to deal with this. Verse 2. They seek me day after day. They delight to know my ways, and they delight in the nearness of God at the end of the verse. Now, follow this text here. This is an incredible testimony, is it not? I think we would all agree that when you have somebody who's seeking me day after day, they're having time alone with the Lord, they're having quiet time with Jesus, they're delighting to know my ways, there's Bible intake, they're studying the Word, they're memorizing the Word, they're applying it, and they delight the nearness of God, they're praying. Aren't these three things we've been talking about? They've had solitude, and they've got time alone with God, they've got prayer time, and they have Bible intake time. Like, this is a picture of somebody who you would say, man, this is a person who's incredibly committed in their relationship with Jesus. Every day they're seeking after me. They delight to know my ways. They get into the Word, Bible intake, and they delight in the names of God, in the nearness of God. Like, this is a picture of somebody who's incredibly passionate in their pursuit of God. In fact, God says this, they're like a nation that does what's right and does not abandon the justice of their God. They seek me for righteous judgments. Like, church, this is a really good description of somebody who you would say, man, this person's growing and improving in their walk with the Lord. They're growing and serving the Lord. Verse 3. But they say this, we have fasted, but you have not seen. We've denied ourselves, but you haven't noticed. You know what they're saying? God, we are pursuing you and seeking you in time with you. We're delighting in your ways and Bible intake. We're delighting in the nearness of God. Our prayer life's never been better. But there's something missing here. God, we're doing this, but you're not hearing, you're not seeing, you're not noticing where we are. In the Old Testament time, fasting was prescribed one day a year. It was the Day of Atonement. It's in the book of Leviticus. In the book of Leviticus, chapter 16, this is not to be a permanent statute for you. This is to be a permanent statute for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you are to practice self-denial and do no work. But the native and the alien who resides, both the native and the alien who resides among you. This is the day for fasting, the Day of Atonement. But what happened is they kind of stretched it out into other areas of their lives, and so they would fast on this day, they would fast on this day. And so while they're pursuing the Lord and Bible intake and spending time in prayer, they kind of added these other things to their relationship with the Lord. And then they scratch their head and they're like, God, we're doing all these things, but you're not noticing. I don't feel like you're listening to me in my prayers. And so here's a quote. Fasting was and still is a beneficial practice. It's always been possible to participate in fasting, to participate in a truly beneficial religious exercise in such a way that no real or lasting benefit is derived. For you and I, we would say this. We have worship every single Sunday morning. We have Sunday school every single week. We have a choir. We have biblically authentic worship. We have vacation Bible school. We do things at Christmas. We have Christmas Eve services and Christmas cantata. We do things at Easter. We have Maundy, Thursday service. We have Easter services. We have Monday Night Alive. We have church-wide barbecues. We have church-wide fish fries. We send people on mission trips, both out of the country, in our state, and in North America. We have incredibly newly renovated student areas. We have an amazing children's and preschool area. We have I'm in the midst of renovating a gym. We're partnering with a church plant in St. Louis. We're doing all of these incredible things. Our time alone with you is growing. Our prayer life's increasing. We're spending out time alone to be with God. But dude, ask yourself this question. God, what's missing here? You ever ask that question in your spiritual life? God, I'm part of all of these things. Our church is doing all of these things. But somehow I feel like sometimes, are you seeing? Are you listening? And God says to the nation of Israel, I'm going to give you 4 reasons why I'm not listening and God's not paying attention. They're in the text. Did you see it? The first is this. He says, why have we not fasted? You've not seen. Why have we denied ourselves, but you haven't noticed? God says, look, you do as you please on the day of your fast. You just kind of live however you want to. Yeah, you do all of these other things. You have your quiet time. You have your time in prayer. You have your time alone with the Lord. You come to church. You do this in Sunday school. You lead this. You go here. But the rest of you just live in your life however you want to live. And just kind of this flippant, whatever happens kind of activity. Just do that. The second thing he says is you're oppressing all of your workers. You've placed undue burdens on people. You've added things to people's lives. You've added things to people's responsibility. You're burdening down those that are around you, the workers and those who are part of your life. He says the third reason is I'm not paying attention is this. He says you fast with contention and strife. He says you have a quiet time in your prayer life and do all of these other things, but in your personal lives, there's contention and strife. There's arguing, there's disagreeing, there's fighting, there's yelling, whatever word you want to add into this to describe contention and strife. But he says, this is your life. And then fourth, he says, you strike viciously with your fists. What is he talking about? He's talking about bragging, boasting, hitting your chest. So put all these three things together. And he says, look, I know you're doing all of these things. You're fasting, you're spending time alone with the Lord, you're seeking the Lord, worship, mission trips, discipleship, all of these things. But you're just living life however you want to live. You're oppressing those people within your life. There's unforgiveness and fighting and anger and contention and strife in some relationships. There's prideful, boasting, and arrogant. And then God says this in verse 4. Don't miss this, church. He says, you can't fast as you do today, hoping to make your voice heard on high. Now sink into the text, okay? Just sink into the text. He says, you can't do all of these things. You can't have quiet time and Bible intake and solitude and mission trips and worship service and choir and youth things. You can't do all of those things and then oppress people, contention and strife in relationships and live how you want to live and boastful and bragging in areas. You can't do that. This is not David. This is God speaking. You can't do that and hope to make your voice heard on high. For some of you are in a marriage right now and you're crying out to God, God, why are you not moving in our marriage? You're worried about your kids and children. You're worried about grandchildren. You're crying out in time with the Lord. You're crying out for behalf of our church. I was thinking this week, for 3 years, we've been pleading with God in 40 days of prayer and 21 days of prayer and fasting and Monday Night Alive and various other ways for God to move amongst us in a mighty way, for God to send revival amongst us in an incredible way. So you have to stop and ask yourself, are there things that in our personal lives that's hindering that? Church, hear my heart. I am convinced today more than ever that my relationships in this world horizontally greatly impact my relationship with the Lord vertically. My relationship with the Lord is impacted amongst these other relationships. He says, you can't do these things and expect your voice to be heard on high. Verse 5, people say this, will the fast I choose be like this? God's like, is this the kind of the fast I chose? A day for a person to deny himself, bow his head like a reed, to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Is this, he says, will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Can you do all of this and it be a day pleasing to the Lord and acceptable to the Lord? The answer there would be no, which leads us to the second part of the text, proper activities during a fast. Proper activities during a fast. He gives 7 things. Don't miss this, church. He gives 7 things to take note of in your relationship with the Lord and kind of where you are in this fasting or pursuit of the Lord and in areas of life. He says, do these 7 things. First, he says, isn't this the fast that I chose? First, to break the chains of wickedness, to untie the ropes of the yoke, to set the oppressed free, and to tear off every yoke. Here's what he's saying. Undo the burden on people. Break the chains, untie the ropes, set free, tear off the yoke. Stop burdening people is what he's saying. Stop lording over, weighing down heavily on people. Let's set them free in their walk with the Lord. Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, Paul says it this way. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm then and don't submit again to a yoke of slavery. Undo the burdens. Untie this. Stop burdening down people. Number 2, he says this. He says, is it not to share your bread with the hungry. Those people in your life who have needs, and share the bread with the hungry. Number 2, to bring the poor and the homeless into your house. Number 3, to clothe the naked when you see them. So take these 3 things together, church. Share your bread, take care of the poor and the homeless, and clothe the naked when you see them. What's Jesus saying here? See, the people's in your life, listen. There's people in your life, there's people in my life who have needs that need to be met. He says, this is what you need to do. Meet those needs. You have a coworker that has a need. Meet the need according to your ability. There's somebody in your life who has a need. Maybe it's a financial need. Maybe it's a spiritual need. Maybe it's a relational need. But there's somebody in your life, in your circle of influence that's hurting. There's somebody in your life, in your circle of influence that's in need of help. And God's given you the ability to come alongside of them. Maybe it's a young mom with raising kids and you raise them and you're an empty nester. You can come alongside of them and help them. Maybe it's being a worker in our children's area, youth area. But there's a need. You can begin to think through these needs. He says, meet these needs. In fact, this is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 25. You know the verse. Jesus says, I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you and thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and take you in, or without clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer him, truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you've done for me. So he says in Isaiah, feed the hungry, take care of the homeless, clothe the naked, care for those who are hurting. And on the New Testament side, they said, Jesus, when did we do these for you? And he said, when you've done it to the least of these, you've done it for me. The 5th thing that he would say is this. He says, take care of your family. Doesn't he? Go back to the text. Don't ignore your own flesh and blood. Now write these down in your mind and on your notebook and keep track of all this. Share your bread. Take care of the poor, clothe the naked. Then he says this, don't ignore your own flesh and blood. This is familiar language. Don't ignore your family. Your kids, your parents, your grandparents, your brothers, your sisters. Don't ignore your family. I think he's talking about family on the Old Testament side, but on the New Testament side, we refer to ourselves often as a faith family. Don't ignore your own flesh and blood. Don't ignore those people who are part of your family. So these are the activities that would be pleasing to the Lord in the midst of a fast, in the midst of a pursuit and a relationship with the Lord. Set free those who are burdened, feed the hungry, take care of the poor, clothe the naked, take care of your family. Then jump down to verse 9, and he says this, number 6, if you get rid of the yoke among you, the finger pointing and the malicious speaking. This is number 6. He said, you can have quiet times and you can have Bible times and you can do worship and you can serve and you can do all of that. But God says this, you got to get rid of this. Get rid of the yoke among you. Stop the finger pointing. Stop the malicious speaking. Get rid of these evil things that would come out of your mouth towards other people. Right? You can just begin to think through in your mind, wait a minute. I'm asking God to move in my marriage. I'm asking God to move in my children's lives. I'm asking God to move in our church. I'm asking God to move in my Sunday school class. I'm asking God to move in our community. I'm asking God to move in our student ministry. And God would say this, I can't hear you. I'm roadblocks and hindrances into this. He says, you got to get rid of these things. In fact, Paul says it this way in Romans chapter 12. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. I said it a minute ago. I'll say it again because I'm convinced of it more today than I was last Sunday. There is a direct relationship in my relationship horizontally with people here and my relationship with God vertically. Number 7, he says this, give yourself. Did you notice what he said? I love this. He says, and if you offer yourself to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted one. He didn't say offer them food. He says offer yourself. He said these are things that please the Lord. These are things that would be honoring to the Lord in the midst of your pursuit of Him, in the midst of your relationship with God. This is what God is saying to the nation of Israel here. Put all of these things together side by side. He says, listen, if I may boil it down into 2 categories. First, he He said these would be proper activities during a fast in your relationship with the Lord. First, meet people's needs according to your ability. You have somebody in your life who has a need, meet it according to your ability. There's somebody in your circle of influence, you have a church that's in need of something and you have the ability to meet it, then meet those needs according to your ability. Give of yourself, he says. And second, he would say this, live at peace with one another. The unforgiveness, the arguing, the malicious talk, the gossip, the this, the that, he says, you got to knock it off. So what happens if I do that? What would happen? Well, the text answers that, doesn't it? Finally, he gives the benefits of a godly fast. Go back to the text. He gives 9 things that happen. This is remarkable. God says these 9 things will happen. First, in verse 8, he says, your light will appear like the dawn. Your light begins to shine bright. It shines bright at home. It shines bright at work. It shines bright at Walmart. It shines bright in traffic on 67, 167. It shines bright in the lines at Kroger. It shines bright in your life. It shines bright at your school. It shines bright in your neighborhood. It shines bright in your circle of influence. It shines bright. Your light will appear like the dawn. In fact, he says it again and down in verse 10. Your light will shine in the darkness. Your night will be like noonday. You will be an incredibly bright light. You'll be a bright light in a dark world. You'll be a bright light at your home, in your neighborhood, around your table. You'll be a bright light within your fellowship. He says if you'll do these things, if you'll set aside these things and pursue these things, you will be a bright light. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. He says your light will shine bright among you. I saw this morning. I added this. I thought this was good. This is from John MacArthur. Your candle loses nothing when it lights another. He says your light will shine bright. Number 2, go back to the text. He says recovery will come quickly. Recovery, revival will come quickly. Your wounds will be healed. He goes on in verse 3, and the third thing is he says this. He says righteousness will go before you and God's glory will come behind you. Righteousness will go before you, your righteousness, and behind you, your vanguard, will be the glory of God. Number 4, he says this, God will answer, here I am. The Lord will answer when you cry out, he'll say, I'm here. And you juxtapose this to verse 3, when they say we cry out, we fast, you don't hear, you don't notice. And now God says this, if you'll do these things, when you cry out, I will hear. When you lift up your voice in prayer to me, I will answer. We begin to have the attentive ear of God. Number 5, he says this, God will lead you. The Lord will lead you. Number 6, he says the Lord will satisfy you. Number 7, he says the Lord will strengthen you. Number 8, he says you will be like a water garden. You will be like a watering garden and like a spring whose water never runs dry. Following this? He says, this is what you'll be like. This is your testimony. When people see you in the hallways of life, when people pass by you at your workplace, when your family sits around the dinner table with you, when you come to gatherings together, he says you will be like a watered garden, like a spring whose water never runs dry, producing fruit, building, speaking into people's lives, being this positive influence. He says, this is who you will be. Then he gets to verse 12 and he says this, you'll do 4 things. You'll rebuild the ancient ruins. You'll restore the foundations laid long ago. You'll be called the repairer of broken walls and the restorer of streets where people live. That's incredible. This is incredible. He says, this is what you'll be. The ancient ruins, things that have been torn down, you'll be able to rebuild them. You'll be able to restore things that have been broken. You'll be able to repair walls that have been destroyed. And you'll be able to restore people's lives and the streets in which they lived on. This is an amazing testimony. He said, if you'll do these things in your pursuit of the Lord, if you'll pursue after me in fasting and praying and seeking the Lord, then these things will become to be your testimony. And then I sat down and I thought, wait a minute. Isn't this what we want our church to be about? Isn't this what we give and go and do for our church to be about? Isn't this what forefathers who've gone before us at Second Baptist, who desired for us and our testimony to Jacksonville and Pulaski County and Arkansas and North America and the world to be? Isn't this what we would pursue and desire for our testimony to be? Put them all together side by side. Don't we want to be a light in darkness? We live in a dark and fallen world. Don't we want to be a light in the middle of the city of Jacksonville? Don't we want to be a healing for wounds? Those families who are hurting, those marriages that are struggling, those children who are wayward, those grandchildren who've walked away, those people who've been abused, those people who've been hurt. Don't we want to be a healing for wounds? Don't we want the righteousness to go in front of us and God's glory to be behind us? Don't we want to be a God who hears when we cry out? Don't we want guidance from God, satisfaction from souls in scorched places, our very bones ready for battle? Do not we want to be so watered by the Lord that we become a spring of water for others to drink and find refreshment? And don't we want to be used by God to rebuild what has been destroyed and make a place of life and hope? Yes. 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 So what we do? I would leave you with two things. First is this. Is there someone in my life that has a need that I have the ability to meet? Ask yourself that question. Is there somebody in my life that has a need that I have the ability to meet? Does our church have a need that you have the ability to meet? It's an important question to ask. Spend time alone with the Lord, pursue Him in prayer, Bible intake, authentic worship. But is there somebody in my life? Is there somebody in my circle that has a need that I have the ability to meet? Maybe it's an encouraging word. Maybe it's a prayer. Maybe it's a phone call or a text message. Maybe it's to babysit a kid. Maybe it's just to come alongside of somebody and say, I'm praying for you. But is there somebody in your life that has a need that you have the ability to meet? The second question I would ask is this. Is there someone in my life that I'm not living at peace with? Is there somebody in my life that I'm not living at peace with? Maybe it's your spouse. And for the last few months or weeks or years, it's just been an argument at your house. And when you get home today, you need to sit down across from the table or a living room and say, you know what, I need to live at peace with you. And you need to ask forgiveness. Maybe it's a kid, a grandkid, a brother or a sister, a mom or a dad. But as I ask that question, God will bring someone to your mind. The Holy Spirit will place somebody on your heart. And you would ask this question. Is there somebody in my life that I'm not living at peace with? See, beloved, the reality is this. We can have worship every week. We can read through the New Testament together. We can have quiet times. We can have nights of prayer. We can seek the Lord. You can be so regimented in your walk with Jesus. You carve out times of solitude, increasing in your daily intake. We can have vacation Bible school and mission trips. We can send people to disaster relief. We can have the finest youth area and children's area in all of Pulaski County. But if we're not meeting needs according to our ability, and if we're not living at peace with people within our lives, I'm fearful that we would hear the words of the Lord. And so for you and I, it's a challenge. The Spirit will speak, and I ask that you be obedient as He speaks.